rain had just started when the news broke across the mansion like an unexpected storm. No thunder, no lightning, just a quiet shift in the air that everyone felt but no one dared to speak about. In the grand estate of Alexander Rothwell, one of the most powerful billionaires in the city, whispers moved faster than the wind. Staff exchanged glances in the hallways, their steps a little quicker, their voices a little lower. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it began with a secret no one should have known. Alexander had built his empire on precision, control, and a reputation so polished that even his enemies could not find a flaw. He was the man everyone watched, everyone envied, everyone expected to be perfect. But behind the perfectly pressed suits and the stone-cold expression he wore like armor, he carried a truth he never planned to face. Her name was Mara. Mara had been working in the mansion for almost 2 years. Quiet, steady, and warm-hearted, she moved through the halls with a soft smile and a calm presence that made even the coldest rooms feel lighter. She never caused trouble, never asked for anything, and never crossed boundaries. But life is a way of unraveling even the tightest knots, and one mistake, one night that neither of them planned, bound Mara and Alexander in a way that could not be undone. When she found out she was pregnant, the world around her seemed to freeze. She stood alone in her small room at the back of the mansion, the test shaking in her trembling hands. Her heart beat so loudly she thought the whole house could hear it. She was carrying a child whose father was untouchable, unreachable, and impossibly distant. She knew what people would say, what they would assume, what they would whisper, and yet she gathered her courage and knocked on his office door. Alexander had looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he had never heard before. His eyes, sharp and calculating, softened for a moment, just a moment. Before the walls came back up, he denied it, not angrily, not loudly, but with a coldness that cut deeper than shouting ever could. He told her she must be mistaken, told her he didn't mix personal emotions with professional spaces, told her that whatever she thought happened wasn't real. His voice remained calm, but she could see the fear hiding behind his confidence, a fear he would never admit. Mara left quietly. She didn't argue. She didn't cry in front of him. She simply walked out of the room with her heart sinking to floor, knowing she would face the journey alone. Months passed. The mansion kept running. The world kept spinning, and everyone pretended nothing had changed. But something had. Mara grew quieter. Some nights she sat by the kitchen window, her hand resting on her stomach, staring out into the darkness as if waiting for something to return. The staff tried to comfort her, but they also knew the truth. In a place ruled by power, her voice would always be the smallest. Still, she carried her baby with strength. She worked as long as she could, moving slowly but with determination. Some workers whispered that Alexander avoided her, that he walked the other way whenever she entered a room, that he pretended she had become invisible. Others said they sometimes caught him watching her from afar, his face unreadable, his eyes lingering on her longer than he should. No one knew what he was thinking, not even him. The day the baby was born changed everything. It was early morning when Mara went into labor. She didn't scream or panic. She simply held on to the edge of her bed, her breath shaking as she whispered prayers into the quiet air. The nurse who arrived from the staff quarters rushed to help her, while some workers ran to the mansion calling for help. No one dared approach Alexander's office. No one except Mrs. Harding, the housekeeper who had known him since he was a child. She knocked once, then twice, then pushed the door open. Alexander looked up from his desk, annoyed at the interruption, but the expression on her face made his pen slip from his fingers. "It's Mara," she said. "She's giving birth." For the first time in months, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, guilt, or something deeper. He stood up too fast, then stopped himself, straightening his jacket as if trying to regain his composed image. He nodded stiffly, pretending this news affected him no more than a business report. But when Mrs. Harding left the room, she could hear his unsteady breath before the door closed. Downstairs, the child's first cry filled the small room, echoing through the hallways like a call no one expected. The staff gathered around, their eyes wide as they watched Mara cradle the baby in her trembling arms. She looked exhausted, pale, and overwhelmed, but when she gazed at her child, a soft smile broke through, pure, fragile, and full of love. The baby was small, wrapped in a soft blanket, tiny hands curling, eyes still closed. But when he finally opened them, the entire room fell silent. Mrs. Harding gasped. The nurse stepped back. Even Mara stared in shock for a moment, unable to fully understand what she was seeing. The baby's eyes, deep, unmistakable, a color that did not belong to her, were identical to Alexander's. Word spread to the mansion faster than anyone could stop it. Some staff whispered in disbelief. Others exchanged knowing looks, and a few simply waited, understanding that a moment like this could not stay hidden for long. A child's eyes could speak the truth Alexander had tried so hard to bury. By late afternoon, the entire household went quiet. Everyone knew what they wanted to see next, what they expected, what would finally force the billionaire to face reality. Some thought he would ignore it. Others believed he would find a way to deny it again. But there was one thing no one knew, what he would do when he finally looked into the eyes of the child he never wanted to acknowledge. And when Alexander finally stepped into the room, slowly, hesitantly, almost as if afraid of what waited for him, the entire mansion held its breath. Because the moment he saw the baby's face, everything changed. And that was only the beginning. Alexander froze in the doorway, his hand still resting on the frame as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. The room was small, warm, and filled with the quiet sounds of the newborn's soft breathing. Mara lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but alert, holding the baby close to her chest. She didn't look at Alexander. She didn't need to. The truth sat between them, tiny, fragile, and undeniable. He took one step inside, then another, each foot seeming heavier than the last. The staff standing around the room slowly stepped back, unsure whether to stay or leave. Their eyes darted between the billionaire and the child, waiting for the moment that would shift the air again. The world outside felt distant, almost muted compared to the tension thickening inside these four walls. Alexander didn't know where to look. His eyes flicked to Mara, her tired face, her trembling hands, the way she held the baby with a mixture of fear and love. Then, almost reluctantly, his gaze dropped to the child. The baby blinked, the same deep-colored eyes looking back at him, eyes he had seen in the mirror every morning of his life. There was no space to escape the truth now. It stared right into him. Mara said nothing. She didn't plead. She didn't ask for anything. She simply held her child like every mother does, with hope, with fear, with a quiet strength that didn't need words. She looked past Alexander, not because she ignored him, but because she refused to break again. She had already been broken once when he denied her. She wasn't going to let him see her fall apart a second time. The silence in the room stretched on. Alexander swallowed, his voice lodged somewhere deep in his chest. He wanted to speak, to explain, to defend himself, but every excuse he had rehearsed over the last month suddenly felt small, meaningless. Shame brushed against him. Not the kind the world could see, but the kind that settled deep where no fortune could reach. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Mara," but the rest of the sentence never formed. Before anything could unfold, Mrs. Harding gently stepped forward, breaking the moment. "Sir," she said softly, "Mara needs rest. The baby needs quiet." Alexander nodded stiffly, then turned and left the room without another word. But the look on his face told everyone he was not the same man who had walked in. Down the hallway, the mansion felt different. Shadows pooled in the corners. Whispers drifted like restless echoes. Some staff wondered what Alexander would do now. Others feared the consequences. A few hoped he would finally take responsibility. No one dared predict the truth, because Alexander wasn't predictable, not even to himself. Once inside his study, he closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. His heart beat harder than it had in years, and he couldn't clear the image from his mind. Those eyes, that tiny face, the way Mara had looked at him without anger, without accusation, only a quiet sadness, a sadness he had caused. He sat down, pressing his hands against his face. For the first time in a long time, the billionaire felt powerless. Mara, meanwhile, held her baby close. She traced a gentle finger over the child's small cheek, feeling his warmth, memorizing every detail. She whispered soft words, promises only a mother could make. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Alexander would try to push them out or pretend nothing had changed. But she knew one thing for sure. She would protect her child, no matter what. As night fell, the mansion grew quiet again. Most of the staff had retreated to their rooms, leaving only a few lights glowing in the hallways. Alexander paced through his study, unable to rest. His mind spun with memories he had spent years burying: his childhood, his father's coldness, the way he vowed never to repeat that legacy. Yet here he was, standing on the edge of becoming the very man he despised. He walked to the window, staring at the rain soaking the gardens outside. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, reminding him of the world he controlled. Businesses, properties, contracts, deals worth millions. He was a man who made decisions with confidence, without hesitating. But now, faced with something far more personal, far more fragile, he felt lost. And as much as he tried to fight it, a voice inside him whispered a truth he didn't want to hear. The child was his. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Mara. She stayed awake, rocking her newborn gently. Every so often, she looked toward the door, expecting someone to knock, to question her, to take her away. But no one came. Not yet. The next morning brought no peace. Word had spread beyond the household. A few staff members, unable to contain the shock, had whispered to people outside the gates: drivers, suppliers, friends, neighbors. And whispers travel fast, especially when a billionaire is at the center of the story. Alexander sensed the shift before anyone said anything. His phone buzzed more than usual. His business partner sent a cryptic message asking if everything was fine. His lawyer requested a sudden meeting. Even a news reporter emailed his assistant asking for a comment on a personal matter. He slammed the phone on his desk, frustration boiling under his skin. He had spent years keeping his private life clean, untouchable. Now one secret, one undeniable truth, was threatening to unravel everything. Mara felt the tension too. She noticed the way some of the newer staff avoided her gaze, as if unsure what to say. She heard whispers from the hallway when they thought she couldn't hear. She tried to stay calm, focusing on her baby's soft breaths, but her heart raced with every passing minute. The mansion didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield she was standing in alone. Mrs. Harding, always protective, stayed close to her. She brought Mara warm soup, extra blankets, and whispered words of comfort. "You did nothing wrong," she said gently. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." But comfort didn't stop reality from creeping in. Later in the afternoon, Alexander appeared at her door again. This time he knocked. Firmly, but not harshly. Mara looked up, startled, clutching her child a little tighter. Mrs. Harding stood near the window, tense but steady. He stepped into the room, the air shifting again. He looked different, tired, troubled, but determined, not angry, not defensive. Something else entirely. "I need to talk," he said quietly. Mara's heart pounded, but she nodded. She didn't know what to expect. An apology? A threat? A negotiation? He was a powerful man. He could change her life with a single decision, for better or for worse. He sat down, his hands clasped tightly. For a long moment, he couldn't look at her. Instead, his eyes drifted to the baby. The child blinked softly, unaware of the storm swirling around him. Alexander finally spoke. "I know what I said before," he whispered, "and I can't take it back. But I want to understand." Mara didn't answer. She simply waited. He swallowed hard, struggling with words he wasn't used to saying. "I need to know everything. About the pregnancy. About what you went through. About the child." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm mask he tried to wear. Mara stared at him, unsure whether to trust this sudden shift. She remembered the cold denial, the look in his eyes when he refused her months ago. But now he looked like a man wrestling with something deeper. Before she could speak, the door suddenly creaked open. It was his lawyer. The man looked pale, anxious, almost shaking. "Sir, we have a serious problem." Alexander turned sharply. "What now?" The lawyer took a breath, hesitating before revealing the truth. "Someone leaked a photo," he said quietly, "of the baby Mara's eyes widened. Alexander's heart dropped. And the media, the lawyer continued, is already connecting the child to you. The room fell into a heavy silence, thicker than before, because now the secret wasn't just inside the mansion. The world knew, and everything was about to get even more complicated. Alexander felt the ground shift under him, as if the walls of his perfectly built world were starting to crack. He stood slowly, his jaw tightening, trying to process the words. A photo already leaked? The media connecting the child to him? It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been possible. Yet the look on his lawyer's face told him everything. This wasn't a rumor. It was real. Mara's breath caught in her chest. She instinctively held her baby closer, as if the outside world could somehow reach into this small room and take him away. Her heart raced with fear she hadn't even had time to name. She didn't understand how a private moment, barely hours old, could have traveled beyond the mansion walls. Who took the photo? Alexander demanded, his voice sharp with anger. The lawyer swallowed nervously. We don't know yet, but it's moving fast. Social media picked it up first. Then a blogger hinted at a Billionaire scandal. A few journalists reached out to our PR team, and we expect major outlets to pick it up within hours. Mara felt her entire body tense. She didn't want this. She never wanted attention, drama, or scandal. She only wanted her child safe. That was all she ever cared about. Alexander ran a hand over his face, pacing. Fear, frustration, and something deeper, guilt, mixed together in his expression. He wasn't used to losing control. His life, his empire, his reputation. Everything was built on order. But now the one thing he tried to hide had become the one thing he couldn't escape. Mrs. Harding, who had stayed quiet until now, stepped forward. Sir, she said calmly, though her voice carried a warning, you need to think carefully. This isn't just about your name. This is about the child, and about Mara. Her words struck him harder than she realized. Alexander turned back toward Mara. She looked small in the bed, exhausted, frightened, yet still holding her newborn with strength. She didn't look like someone causing trouble. She didn't look like someone trying to trap a billionaire. She looked like a young woman who had already survived more than she ever admitted. He opened his mouth to say something, but a loud vibration from his phone interrupted. More messages, more pressure, more eyes watching him. The lawyer cleared his throat. Sir, reporters are already gathering near the estate's gate. We've increased security, but it's getting chaotic. Mara's eyes widened. They're here? Outside. Yes, the lawyer said quietly. It's only going to grow. A deep fear washed through her. She had never been exposed like this. She had never been judged by strangers who didn't know her story, her struggles, her pain. And now her baby, her innocent child, had become the center of a storm she didn't ask for. Alexander felt something shift inside him again. He didn't know if it was protectiveness, guilt, or responsibility finally catching up to him. But he felt something. And for once, he didn't try to push it away. I'm going to find who leaked it, he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. No one had the right. The lawyer nodded, relieved to have direction. I'll have the staff questioned. Security footage checked. Phone logs reviewed. But Mrs. Harding spoke again, more firmly this time. Before you chase the source, think about what you're going to do with the truth. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Alexander glanced at Mara, then at the baby, then back at the door as if torn between two worlds. The world he built for himself and the world now hanging in the balance. He left the room without another word, the lawyer hurrying behind him. Mara exhaled shakily, unsure what to think. Mrs. Harding placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. This is going to get harder, the older woman whispered. But you're not alone. Mara nodded, though fear still tightened around her heart. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with tension. Some staff members tried to look busy, others whispered in corners. A few avoided eye contact entirely. Everyone knew something enormous was happening, something that could change all their lives. Alexander walked straight to his office, anger simmering beneath the surface. But this wasn't the loud, explosive anger people expected from a powerful man. This was quiet, cold, and dangerous. The kind of anger born from losing control over something deeply personal. As his lawyer updated him on the situation, Alexander's mind drifted back to the child's eyes. Clear, unmistakable, and haunting. There was no denying the truth anymore. And the fact that the world now knew that same truth made everything 10 times more complicated. But another question gnawed at him. Who wanted to expose this? Who had something to gain? He thought of his business rivals. People who envied him. People who resented him. But none of them had access to the baby. None of them knew what happened behind these walls. Which meant the source was someone inside the house. Someone he trusted. He turned to the lawyer. Give me every name. Every person who had access to that room. No exceptions. The lawyer nodded. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, chaos brewed. Cars lined the street. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions at the gates. Questions that cut deep even when no one answered them. Is the child really his? Who is the mother? Is the billionaire hiding something? Why was a maid involved? Mara's heart sank with each muffled echo of the crowd. She didn't deserve this. Her child didn't deserve this. But life didn't wait for fairness. Upstairs, she tried to calm her baby, humming softly, but her voice trembled. She imagined her family back home hearing the news, confused and scared. She imagined the world making judgments without knowing the truth. And she imagined Alexander making decisions that could change everything for her. Hours passed, but the tension didn't fade. It grew. By evening, the sky darkened again with heavy clouds. A storm was rolling in, matching the turmoil inside the house. Alexander finally returned to Mara's room. He looked worn, as if he had aged just from the weight of the day. "We found something," he said quietly. Mara stiffened. Mrs. Harding straightened beside her. Alexander hesitated before continuing. One of the newer workers left the estate right after birth. Security saw her rushing out. She didn't clock out, didn't take her belongings, just left. Mara blinked. Why would she? "We tracked her phone," he said. "She met someone outside the estate, someone who wanted information." The puzzle started forming, but the edges were jagged and unclear. "And there's more," he added, his voice lowering. She was hired under false documents. Fake references. Fake address. Mara exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Harding. "Someone planted her here," Alexander said, the truth settling like a weight between them. Someone wanted this story to explode. He looked at Mara, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something deeper, something unresolved. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered. "Someone wanted to destroy us." The room went still. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows. Inside, the real storm was only beginning. The thunder grew louder, rolling across the night like a warning. Alexander stood in front of Mara, but his mind was racing in too many directions at once. The idea that someone had planted a stranger inside his home wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. His estate was supposed to be secure, private, untouchable, and yet someone had slipped in unnoticed, waited patiently, and struck when the moment was most vulnerable. Mara felt her fingers grow cold. She didn't know much about Alexander's world, but she knew enough to understand this wasn't random. Someone with resources, someone with motive, someone determined had targeted them. But why? She wasn't important. She had no power. All she had was her child. A child who now carried the weight of the scandal that was spreading like wildfire. The baby stirred in her arms, and she held him closer, as if shielding him from dangers she couldn't see. Alexander's voice finally broke the silence. "Someone wants to ruin me, and they're willing to drag you and the baby into it." Mara's heart skipped. But who would do that? He didn't answer at first. He moved toward the window, looking out at the flashes from reporters' cameras in the distance. His jaw tightened. There were names he could think of, competitors, former associates who were bitter about past deals, even distant family members who despised the success. But none of them felt quite right. This attack wasn't about business. It wasn't about money. It was too personal. When he turned back, his eyes were darker than before. "I don't know yet, but I will find out." Mrs. Harding stepped closer, lowering her voice. Sir, the child and Mara must be protected. This is no longer just a story in the media. Whoever did this might try something else. The weight of those words settled heavily in the room. Mara's throat tightened. Protected from what? Mrs. Harding glanced at Alexander, urging him to speak. Alexander stepped closer to the bed. The woman who leaked the photo didn't do it alone. Whoever planted her, paid her, gave her instructions. They wanted the story to go public at the worst possible moment, right when the baby was born. Why now? Mara whispered. Because now, he said quietly, you and the baby are the most vulnerable. A sudden knock on the door made everyone jump. Alexander moved instinctively, placing himself between Mara and the door. His voice was sharp. Who is it? It's me, came the voice of his head of security. Sir, we have a situation. Alexander opened the door enough for the man to enter. The security chief looked tense, rain dripping from his coat. Sir, he said, trying to keep his voice calm, a drone was spotted over the estate. Mara gasped softly. Mrs. Harding covered her mouth. Alexander's eyes hardened. A drone? Yes, carrying a high-resolution camera. It flew close to the upper floor windows before we managed to disable it. The room fell into a suffocating silence. The security chief continued. Someone is watching the house. They know the layout, and they're not stopping. Mara felt her breath catch. They were watching us. Alexander didn't hesitate. Get more men at every entrance. Expand the patrols. And find out where that drone came from. The security chief nodded and left the room. When the door clicked shut, Mara looked at Alexander with wide, trembling eyes. Why would someone go this far? Why follow us? Why watch the baby? Her voice cracked, the fear finally spilling through. Alexander sat beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she felt a shift in the air. Because they want leverage. They want to expose me, damage me, control the narrative. And they know the story of a billionaire, a maid, and a child is the perfect target. But the baby is innocent, Mara whispered, tears filling her eyes. I know, he said softly. Outside, thunder exploded again, rattling the window. The storm matched the chaos inside his heart. He had spent his life avoiding emotional vulnerability, guarding himself behind contracts, deals, and walls of power. But nothing in his life had ever prepared him for this, being forced to face the consequences of a mistake he tried to bury. And now that mistake had become a tiny human, depending on him for protection. A knock came again, this time softer. Mara's heart jumped before Mrs. Harding went to open it. A young housemaid stood there, nervous, holding a folded slip of paper in her hand. Someone left this at the back gate, she whispered. It was taped to the fence. Mrs. Harding took it, frowned, and handed it to Alexander. He unfolded the paper slowly. Mara watched his expression tighten, first with confusion, then with shock, then with something darker. What is it? Mara whispered urgently. He hesitated before showing her. It was a printed photo. A photo of Mara sitting alone in one of the mansion's garden benches from months ago, before she was pregnant, before everything changed. She was looking down, her posture tired, unaware she was being watched. The angle was distant but clear, someone spying from behind the hedges. And on the back of the photo was a message. You can't hide the truth forever. Mara's stomach twisted. This was taken before everything? Alexander nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. They've been watching longer than we thought. Mrs. Harding inhaled sharply. This isn't about the baby. It started long before. Mara felt the weight of those words press into her chest. Someone had been watching her, following her, tracking moments she didn't even realize were important. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing the room as tension built in every step. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was alarmed. An alarm from a man like him meant something big. Something dangerous was coming. We need to move you, he said finally. You can't stay in this room. It's too exposed. Too many windows. Too easy to target. Mara clutched her baby protectively. Where will we go? I have a safer part of the house, he said. No outside view. Reinforced doors. Only a few people know about it. Mrs. Harding didn't argue. I'll help pack her things. Mara's heart pounded, but she nodded. She didn't have the strength to question anymore. She only wanted her baby safe. As they prepared to leave the room, a sudden flash lit up the window. Another camera from outside. Reporters were catching every shadow, every movement. Alexander moved quickly, pulling the curtains shut. The shadows outside swarmed like vultures circling prey. He turned back to Mara, his voice low, urgent. This is no longer just a scandal. Someone is pushing us toward something. And until we know who or why, you're in danger. Mara looked at him, fear and disbelief swirling inside her. But why target me? Why the baby? Alexander's expression was grim as he opened the door for them to move. I don't know, he whispered, but whoever it is, they're getting closer. And with that, they stepped into the dim hallway, unaware that someone, somewhere inside the sprawling estate, was watching every moment, waiting for the perfect time to strike. The rain had finally softened to a mist, leaving the city wrapped in a strange, muted calm. But inside Eleanor's heart nothing felt still. She sat at the edge of the guest room bed, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress, as Richard paced near the window. He hadn't spoken much since they left the wedding hall, since the truth about the maid, about Elena, about her, had shattered the room like a dropped crystal glass. He kept trying to understand everything she had hidden, and she kept trying to find the right words, but somehow the silence between them felt heavier than anything they had confessed. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the door. She still felt the echo of the earlier confrontation, the shocked faces, the way people murmured as if her entire life had been nothing but a story she wasn't allowed to tell. But what haunted her more was Richard's expression when he saw her trembling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was something else. Fear mixed with confusion, as if he sensed there was still more she hadn't said. Just when she finally gathered the courage to speak, the hotel phone rang sharply, slicing through the quiet. Richard frowned and reached for it. The moment he pressed it to his ear, his expression changed. The color drained from his face, and he stepped back as though the carpet beneath him had shifted. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely holding together. His hand tightened around the phone. "Are you sure?" Eleanor stood quickly, her pulse thudding in her ears. "Richard, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at her as though he wasn't seeing her, but something beyond her, something that unsettled him more than anything he'd learned that night. When he finally spoke, his tone cracked ever so slightly. "My father, he's not at home." Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean?" "He left the wedding early." "He did," Richard cut in softly, "but he never arrived. The driver said he dropped him outside the house, and then he vanished. The gate cameras were disabled." A cold weight settled in Eleanor's stomach. This wasn't normal. Richard's father was a man who controlled everything, his schedule, his image, his entire world. He never just disappeared, not without leaving a trail, not without a reason. Richard ran a shaky hand through his hair. "And that's not all. The call, it came from the security office. They found something outside the estate, something addressed to you." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "To me?" He hesitated, as if unsure whether to tell her. But the truth was already breaking through the silence. A letter, and inside it there was a photograph. Her heart hammered painfully. "A photograph of what?" Richard's voice lowered. "You. From before you ever came to work for us. Before we even knew your name." The room spun for a moment. That life, those years, she had buried carefully, painfully, believing no one would ever unearth them again. She had changed her identity not to hide from the world, but from one person specifically. Someone who once warned her that if she ran, they would follow. Eleanor took a step back, her fingers trembling. "Richard, I didn't tell you everything, because I thought it was over. I thought he would never find me again." Richard's eyes widened. "He? Who are you talking about?" She opened her mouth to answer, but before a single word could escape, a soft knock echoed from the hallway outside the hotel room. Slow, deliberate, and chilling. Both of them froze. No one knew they were here. No one should have been able to find them so quickly. The knock came again, slightly louder this time, as if whoever stood outside already knew they were hesitating. Richard moved instinctively, placing himself between Eleanor and the door. His voice dropped into a whisper. "Stay behind me." But Eleanor shook her head, her voice unsteady. "No, if it's him, I need to see." The knocking stopped. Silence swallowed the hallway. And then a single envelope slid slowly under the door. Richard stared at it, his expression darkening with fear and disbelief. When he bent to pick it up, he paused, noticing something that made his breath hitch. The envelope wasn't addressed to Eleanor this time. It was addressed to both of them. And underneath their names, in narrow, deliberate handwriting, was one chilling sentence. "Don't run. You've already been forgiven." Eleanor felt the room tighten around her. Forgiven? For what? And by who? But before she could process the message, Richard turned the envelope over, and the blood drained from his face. The seal wasn't wax. It was a fingerprint, pressed in something that looked disturbingly like smeared dry clay, except darker, almost black, as if taken from someone who crawled out of the earth rather than walked on it. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice trembling. "This isn't him, this is something else." And for the first time since the night began, Richard didn't try to reassure her. He simply whispered, "Whatever this is, it's not over. It's just beginning." The room felt smaller after the envelope appeared, as if the walls had slowly leaned in to listen. Richard held it carefully, almost afraid of what he might find inside. Eleanor watched it with her breath unsteady, her hands cold despite the warmth of the room. When he finally tore it open, a single folded page slipped out and drifted to the floor like something weightless yet dangerous. Richard picked it up, unfolded it, and his eyes widened. "It's an address and a time. Midnight," he whispered. "It's telling us to come." Eleanor's heart thudded painfully. "Richard, we shouldn't go. Whoever sent that." "We don't have a choice," he said softly. "If my father is in danger, if your past is tied to this, we need answers." She knew he was right. Running wasn't going to work anymore. Not when someone knew exactly who she was, where she was, and what she feared. For the first time, they stepped out together. Not as employer and maid, not as two people linked by confusion, but as partners facing something bigger than both of them. The address led them to the outskirts of the city, a quiet area where streetlights flickered and the air felt colder than it should. An old greenhouse stood ahead, its glass panels cracked and its metal frame rusting. It looked abandoned, but a faint glow inside told them they were expected. Richard squeezed her hand before pushing the door open. Inside, the air smelled of damp soil and forgotten years. Rows of empty planting tables stretched out, and at the far end, a single lantern flickered on a wooden crate. Next to it stood a figure, older, thinner, and more fragile-looking than Eleanor remembered. Her breath caught. "Mr. Hale?" Richard stiffened. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "He was my guardian once, before everything fell apart." Mr. Hale turned toward them, his voice soft but steady. "I knew you'd come. Both of you." Richard took a step forward. "Where's my father?" The older man nodded toward a side door. "He's safe. Sitting inside that office. I didn't harm him." Eleanor's confusion deepened. "Then why all this? The letters? The photographs? Why drag us here?" Mr. Hale reached into his coat and pulled out another envelope. This one already opened, its edges worn. "Because someone has been lying to you both. And it wasn't Eleanor." He handed it to Richard. Inside was a document, an old agreement with Richard's father's signature and a younger version of Mr. Hale's. Eleanor recognized it immediately. "It's the contract," she whispered. "The one that ruined your life." Mr. Hale nodded. "Your father didn't just ruin me. He used you, Eleanor. He made sure you never spoke up. And when you ran to protect yourself, he followed you quietly, making sure you stayed where he wanted." Richard's voice faltered. "My father wouldn't." But the truth was written in the ink, in the dates, in the cold calculations of the agreement. Eleanor stepped closer to Richard. "I didn't hide my past because it was shameful. I hid it because someone powerful controlled it." The lantern flickered again, as if agreeing. Mr. Hale sighed. I sent the messages to bring you both here because your father needed to face what he did, not to punish him, but to finally stop the cycle. He knew he was losing control. That's why he tried to leave the wedding without drawing attention. Richard swallowed hard. So all this wasn't a threat? No, Mr. Hale said with a faint smile. It was a warning, a chance to tell the truth before someone else did. Eleanor exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from her chest. For the first time in years, she felt something close to freedom. Richard looked between her and Mr. Hale, hurt but grateful that he finally knew the truth. The office door opened and Richard's father stepped out, his eyes tired and defeated. He didn't argue. He didn't pretend. He simply whispered, "I thought I could control everything, but I was wrong." For a moment, the room felt peaceful, like the world had finally stopped spinning too fast. But as Richard turned to Eleanor, ready to tell her something he'd been holding back for days, the lantern suddenly flickered again, this time unnaturally, the flame stretching sideways instead of upward. Mr. Hale froze. That shouldn't happen. A soft rustling echoed from behind the planting tables. Richard tensed, stepping protectively in front of Eleanor. But when the sound grew louder, they realized it wasn't someone hiding. It was something falling. A curtain of dried vines collapsed off the wall, revealing a small metal box screwed into the frame, blinking with a tiny red light, a recording device. And it was still on. Richard's father's face went pale. "That's not mine," Mr. Hale whispered, horrified. "I didn't put that there." Eleanor felt a chill race up her spine. "Then who did?" The lantern sputtered again, and the red light blinked faster, as if sending a warning none of them were prepared for. Someone else knew. Someone else had been listening. And whoever they were still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to step in. The blinking red light froze everyone where they stood. For a long moment, no one spoke, and the quiet inside the old greenhouse felt heavier than the air itself. Richard stared at the small device, like it carried the last missing piece of a puzzle he never wanted to solve. Eleanor felt her heartbeat rise, but strangely, she didn't feel fear this time. Only a steady determination that had been building in her ever since the truth started unraveling. Richard's father slowly moved forward, his trembling hand reaching toward the device before pulling back. "Someone planted this long before we came here," he whispered. "Someone who already knew everything." Mr. Hale exhaled and shook his head. "I thought I was the only one digging into the past, but it seems I wasn't alone." His voice softened as he added, "Maybe someone wanted this truth to surface no matter what." Richard stepped closer and gently put an arm around Eleanor, guiding her a bit behind him. But she didn't hide. She stood tall beside him, refusing to disappear into the shadows again. The past had followed her long enough. "We can't stay here," Richard said quietly. "Whoever monitored us, they've already heard enough." Mr. Hale nodded and extinguished the lantern. The faint moonlight through the cracked glass gave them just enough light to move. Together, they left the greenhouse, stepping out into the cold night, where everything felt strangely calm, as if the world had been holding its breath. When they reached Richard's car, no one spoke until they were all inside. Richard drove them away from the abandoned area, his mind racing. Eleanor watched him silently, sensing the mix of anger, worry, and protectiveness in his eyes. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. "I don't care who else is listening anymore. The truth is out between us, and I'm not running from it." Eleanor turned toward him. "Neither am I." Richard's father let out a slow sigh from the back seat. "There's something else I need to say. Something I should have said years ago." His voice was quieter now, worn down by guilt. "I tried to control your life, Richard, and I tried to control Eleanor's. I thought power could shape things the way I wanted, but all it did was break the people around me." Eleanor felt the sincerity in his tone. She didn't forgive him instantly. Some wounds took time, but she understood that his fear of losing control had created a chain of events that hurt them all. Mr. Hale cleared his throat. "And you're not the only one who made mistakes. I should have fought harder to protect Eleanor when she was younger. I thought disappearing from your life would keep you safer. But maybe it did the opposite." Eleanor placed a hand over her heart. "You both made choices. But tonight it finally ends. They drove until they reached a quiet overlook where the city lights shimmered in the distance. Richard parked the car, and they all stepped out, letting the cold air calm their thoughts. The blinking recorder still echoed in Eleanor's mind, but she knew something now. Whoever had planted it didn't matter anymore. The truth wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried. And without secrets to control them, no one could use their past as leverage again. Richard stood beside her, taking her hand. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I can't change what happened. I can't erase how much pain you carried alone. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, her eyes warm but steady. "And I'm not going to hide anymore." For the first time, it didn't feel like she was the one being rescued. It felt like she was finally stepping into her own life with strength she never believed she had. Richard's father approached them slowly. "I know I owe both of you more than apologies," he said. "So I'm stepping down from the board, effective tomorrow. I need to fix the parts of my life I neglected and earn forgiveness instead of expecting it." The confession surprised Richard, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply nodded, the old tension between father and son softening into something new, something honest. Mr. Hale gave Eleanor a small, proud smile. "And I'm staying in town," he said. "If you ever want to talk or yell or ask questions I avoided for years, I'm here. I'm done disappearing." Eleanor's eyes warmed. "I think I like that." The night stayed calm around them. No mysterious figures, no hidden devices, no more shadows pulling strings from behind the scenes. Whoever had placed the recorder clearly didn't show themselves again. Maybe they were just someone curious, someone who wanted to expose the truth but didn't dare face the people involved. Or maybe they simply didn't matter anymore now that everything had finally come into the light. Eleanor and Richard stayed by the railing overlooking the city long after the others stepped aside. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It felt peaceful, like something healing had begun. Richard gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've been carrying so much alone," he whispered. "But from now on you don't have to." She leaned into him slightly, letting herself feel what she had been denying for months. Comfort, trust, and a connection built not on power or fear, but shared truth. "Richard," she said softly, "there's one thing you never asked." "What?" "Why I didn't fight harder to tell you earlier." He looked at her with calm understanding. "Because you were protecting yourself, and you didn't know if I'd believe you." Eleanor nodded, grateful he understood without anger. "But I believe you now," he added, "and I'll keep believing you." The city lights flickered below, but in that moment, the world felt brighter. Richard's father walked back toward them. "We should all head home," he said gently. "This night, it's been long for everyone." On the drive back, no one talked much. But the quiet wasn't tense. It was reflective. A chapter had closed, and another was beginning. When they reached the mansion, Richard walked Eleanor to her room. He didn't push or rush anything. He simply stood by the door and said, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Eleanor smiled, tired but steady. "Yes, we do." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "And Eleanor, the baby's eyes? They weren't a mistake. They were the truth trying to speak." Her heart warmed at the words. It was true. Those eyes had changed everything. They had forced Richard to see what he refused to believe. They had pushed the truth into the open. And now, they were no longer a source of pain, but a symbol of the future she would no longer be ashamed of. Richard squeezed her hand. "Good night." "Good night," she whispered. After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed and took a long breath. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled her. She wasn't the frightened girl running from shadows. She wasn't the invisible maid hiding secrets. She was a woman who faced everything and still stood tall. And as she looked out the window at the fading glow of the city, she realized something important. Truth may break things, but it also rebuilds. It reshapes. It frees. This story wasn't just about a billionaire, a maid, or a child with telling eyes. It was about choosing honesty over fear, love over silence, and a new beginning over a painful past. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed she truly deserved that beginning.